Welcome to educator.com. This lesson is about multiplying integers. You'll learn about multiplying integers which represent repeated addition. Applications are situations where you would use multiplying integers. For example, totaling bills. If you have a cell phone that has a monthly rate and you have to pay it every month, so that would be 12 times the amount that is deducted from your bank account. Rates of change. For example, a skydiver diving continues to fall at a certain rate for several seconds before opening his parachute. Vocabulary for this lesson are integers and opposites. Integers are positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. Examples are -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3, and so on. Opposites are numbers that are the same distance from 0, but on either side of the number line. For example, -3 is 3 units away from 0, and its opposite, +3, is also 3 units away from 0. Another example is -5, which is 5 units away from 0, and +5, which is also 5 units away from 0. 0 is its own opposite. Another way to define integers is to say all numbers and their opposites, all whole numbers and their opposites, and including 0. Multiplying integers is a fast way to do repeated addition. Let me show you how this would be represented on a number line. If we start out at 0, -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, I'm going to extend my number line a little more. Okay, this is telling me that I have 3 groups of -4. So first let me find one group of -4. Okay, that's my first group of -4. From here to here. And I'm going to find another group of -4. 2, 3, 4. That's my second group. And my final group of -4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here I have 1, 2, 3 groups of -4. Within each of these groups, there's a value of -4. So 3 groups of -4 ends up at -12. 3 times -4 equals -12. So we're adding 3 groups of -4. The sum of 3 groups of -4 is -12. Here's another example using a number line. This is asking for 4 groups of -2. Here's my number line. I call this 0, 1, 2. So here is a group of -2, 2 units in the negative direction. Here's another group of -2. That's 2 groups. Here's 3 groupings. And lastly, the 4th group. So with 4 groups of -2, I end up at -8. So 4 times -2 equals -8. Let's look at the opposite when you're multiplying 2 negatives. It's saying the opposite of 4 groups of -2. Notice this is saying the opposite becomes a +8. Let's look at a number line to multiply 2 negatives. It's telling me to go in the opposite direction. This first negative means the opposite. So the opposite of -4 groups, The opposite of 3 groups of negative 4 would be to move in the positive direction. So instead of moving in the negative direction on the number line, I'm now going to move in the opposite direction as represented by this first negative. So I'm going to go a group of 4, a group of 4. Need to extend my number line. And my last group of 4. So negative 3 times negative 4 ends up at positive 12 because of this first negative sign. That's telling me to take the opposite of moving in the negative 4 direction. Now there is no opposite with the 3. It just wants 3 groups of negative 4. So in this case on the number line, I'm going to be moving in the negative direction. Let me extend my number line. So let's take 3 groups of negative 4. Here's my first group of negative 4, here's my second group, and my last group, which ends up at negative 12. So 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. Let's look at the two to compare. Negative 3 times negative 4 is a positive 12. Positive 3 times negative 4 is a negative 12. This first problem here is asking you to take the opposite of the negative 4. So that's why we moved in the positive direction. The second one just wants straightforward 3 groups of negative 4. So we moved in the negative direction. Rules for multiplying integers. If you memorize the rules for multiplying integers, it will probably be easier than using the number line. It's shorter and easier to think about. So let's look at the arithmetic rules. Whenever you multiply 2 integers with the same sign, your answer is always going to be positive. So for example, 2 times 5 are both positive values and your answer is a positive 10. Or negative 2 times negative 5 is also a positive 10. So your answer is always positive. In algebra, you could represent this by a times b, which equals ab, positive value, negative a times negative b, which will also equal positive value ab. When multiplying integers with different signs, let's rewrite that. When multiplying integers with different signs, your answer will always be negative. So let me show you an arithmetic representation. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. Or negative 8 times a positive 3 is negative 24. So notice here that the 8 and the negative 3 have opposite signs, so your answer is negative. Once again, down here, the 8, the negative 8, and the positive 3 have opposite signs, so your answer is negative. The algebra representation could be a times negative b equals negative ab, or negative a times a positive b is negative ab. Notice that in both these situations, the variables have opposite signs, and so your answer ends up being negative. Let's try some examples of multiplying integers. 3 times 8. I'm multiplying 2 positive values, so my answer is going to be positive. In this case, I'm multiplying 2 integers with the same sign, a negative times a negative. So once again, my answer will be positive, 24. In this case, I'm multiplying numbers with opposite signs, negative 9 times a positive 8. So my answer is going to be negative. In this last example, I'm multiplying 2 numbers with the same sign, So negative times a negative is going to give me a positive value. 7 times 6 is 42. Let's apply multiplying integers to some word problems. A skydiver falls at a rate of 56 miles per second. The skydiver waits 7 seconds before opening his parachute. Use an integer to express the change in the skydiver's elevation. So the skydiver is going down 56, should be meters. So negative 56, negative 56, negative 56 for each second. And this continues. He's moving downwards. So instead of adding negative 56 repeatedly 7 times, let's use multiplication. And remember to think about your sign. The skydiver is moving downwards, so my answer is going to be negative 56 times 7. 42, 35, 39. So negative 392. The skydiver has gone down negative 392 meters before he opens his parachute. Let's try an example with temperature. The temperature drops 3 degrees Fahrenheit each hour for 5 hours after the sun sets. Write an integer to express the total drop in temperature. So we're looking for the total drop. We know that each hour it goes down 3 degrees, but we want to find out where the temperature is after 5 hours. Instead of adding negative 3 5 times, let's use multiplication. Since the temperature is dropping, I'm going to use a negative 3 to represent the situation. And this is continuing on for 5 hours. So I'm going to multiply times 5. So remember that your temperature is going down, so your final answer will be a negative. And also the rules of multiplication tell us whenever we multiply numbers with opposite signs, your answer will be negative. 3 times 5 is 15. So the integer expressing the total temperature is negative 15. Let's determine the sign of a product. There are shortcuts that you can use to think about when you're multiplying several numbers, what your final answer, the sign of your final answer. So remember that when you multiply 2 numbers with the same sign, it gives you a positive. So a negative times a negative here will give me a positive. As well, a negative times a negative will give me a positive. Notice that I have an even number of negative signs, so that will result in a positive value. In this situation, a negative times a negative is a positive, a negative times a negative is a positive, but it's an odd number of negative signs. And I end up with 1 negative here. So my final answer will be negative. See if you can answer this question. The product of 3 negative numbers, is it positive or negative? So think about the number 3 for negative signs. Okay, let's test it out. A negative times a negative times a negative. A negative times a negative will become a positive, and a positive times a negative will give me a negative. So in this case, I have an odd number, 3 negative signs, so my answer will be a negative. The product of 4 negative numbers, is that positive or negative? I have an even number of negative signs, so my final answer will be a positive value. The product of 5 negative numbers, is it positive or negative? In this case, I have an odd number, 5 negative signs, and my final answer will be negative. Is the product of 103 negative numbers positive or negative? Let's look at the number 103. That is an odd value, so my final answer is going to be negative. Thank you for watching educator.com.